So, New York Times has an article titled "The Next Affordable City is Already Too Expensive." This kind of like one of my favorite things to talk about because it's at intersection of everything. Well, one, I'm a real estate investor, and I'll always just to stick to my niche, which is probably all going to be Cincinnati, Ohio, because that's the city that I know, and it doesn't make sense to try to like move all over the country, trying to find the hottest market or whatever, and then trying to find contractors. Just too much work, especially when you can get good deals in your own city. But I love to talk about city governments and how now technology is completely changing. That people can do with remote work. People are not stuck under tyrannical city governments. Um, they can move to where their tax dollars go way further. Um, and it's interesting to see some of these older, smaller cities in America that are probably forgotten, uh, have a new life, reanimated, become hip again, which is pretty dope. It's pretty interesting to see maybe seeing other people who invested there a long time ago, would just find get rich and find success. Um, so yeah, it's the interesting thing is about the remote work, city governance, and also you have the big, you know, 6,000 pound gorilla we have is the Federal Reserve and how that plays into it. Now I skimmed this article here by Corner Doutry, and he's talking about mostly Spokane, Washington. But I didn't see him a single time mention the Federal Reserve and he's just basically talking about. Well, house prices are going up. I guess you have the ground zero, which is Los Angeles, New York, obviously. So you have a secondary market like Austin that people fleeing to. But now Austin is becoming so expensive that people are fleeing to the third city where it's cheap. And the local pricing out local residents. I'll get into what some of the ramifications are. But and he does mention that like these investors are like sharks that just flood in and just buy up. They have deep pockets and buy up all outbid all the locals. Um, but the issue is all commodities and all prices, I mean, everything is going up because of the Federal Reserve and what they did to the money supply. Because if you think about it, let's say everybody's fleeing LA because it's so expensive, politics, I mean the horrible government, they have homeless people everywhere that they enabled, that they pay to be there. And you don't have to be stuck in traffic, whatever. That's great. Well, that people leaving California and New York, well, that should put a downward pressure on their rents, because look, all these people that could pay a lot of money. They're leaving. They're freeing up units, but that's strangely not happening. LA rents are all time high. Their real estate is all time high. So there isn't a natural market here. It just seems like prices are just being inflated everywhere. It's almost as if almost to just a bunch of money. Everybody's got a whole bunch of extra money. Now people could say, "Oh, that's greed" or whatever. People rents rose to, well, let's see, in Texas, like maybe Florida, in some parts of Florida, 30%, in some parts of Texas, 40%. I'm sure Phoenix is off the charts. You can say, "Oh, well, that's greed." But as a landlord who rents properties, I always set the rental price to the max that I think I can get. And if it doesn't rent for that, I just lower it a little bit and keep lowering it until there's a renter. So obviously, it's not the greed. It's just if the rental prices are set high, is because the landlords determined that it will actually rent for that price. And if they set it high, and then they get all sorts of messages all sorts of interest. Well, that just confirms their, and then especially for rents. Now, if that apartment actually gets rented for that higher rate, well, you have all sorts of websites like Rentometer keep track of that, and now other investors come into the market, and then when they do research about like the neighborhood, see if it's worth buying in that neighborhood, well, they do the research on how much it can rent for, and those websites like Rentometer can tell you that, oh, look, there's a big jump in rents here, and they just start buying up cheap or abandoned buildings, trying to rehab them, try to capture that value. So yeah, let's get into the article. So basically, it starts off about a couple. Steve McDonald decided was done with Los Angeles. He wanted a city that was smaller and cheaper. Uh, and I would say, I mean, for people, this article is complaining about like affordability and stuff like that. Well, and or the investors driving up prices and making everything unaffordable. Well, what's kryptonite to investors? There'll still be affordable places in America for sure. What's kryptonite to investors is falling rents. In falling rents because the jobs are leaving, and just population loss because the jobs are leaving, basically, and also cold weather because now people can work remotely. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure a lot of the hot money, all the investors are flooding into the South where it's warm, where people can work remotely. So you could always find, I'm sure, a good deal in the frigid Detroit or other cities that are just losing population, and just investors for one reason or another just don't want to invest there. Of course, the rents are still going to be inflated because of all the hot money printing, but way less than the obvious, Austins. He wanted a city that was smaller and cheaper, big enough that he could find a decent restaurant, but not so much that's a problem. Felt unsolvable, and every little task takes an odyssey. I guess he was talking about L.A. So, Mr. McDonald works at Spokane Director, Community and Economic Development. He arrived at day to tackle familiar conundrum: how to prevent Spokane from developing the same kinds of problems that people like him are moving there to escape. Which is funny. I mean, this New York Times article is probably talking about zoning, but I'm sure they don't mean it. But the reader could think of progressive politics, like a bunch of progressives moving to a city and feeling bad for the homeless and enacting all these rent controls that constrain supply and put upward pressure on rents, or become NIMBYs and stop development, or actually paying homeless people like $600 a month to stay homeless and shoot up drugs in the park. Yeah, that's a real concern. But too much from my knowledge, it's the fears of that are overblown. It's possibly that more conservative people just that are fed up with LA and New York are moving to redder cities. I don't think there's a lot of hardcore liberals that are moving to these red states, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm realizing more and more how important the future prosperity of the city about getting housing right. If we don't, it's going to track more closely with what happened in LA. Mr. McDonald knows the pattern, so does everyone else who has been following the forensic U.S. housing market for the past decade. The story plays out locally, but in its national scope, it is the story of people having high-cost cities become, high-cost cities because they've been priced out or become fed up with how impossible the housing problem seems. It becomes the story of a city trying to tame prices by building more housing, followed by the story of neighbors fighting to prevent it, followed by the story of less expensive cities being deluged with buyers from more expensive cities, followed by the less expensive cities descending into the same problems and struggling with the same solutions. Yeah, but like I said, it's also it's not, I mean, the problem of so much money. People have so much money that was given to them by the Federal Reserve, this caused inflation to shoot up. So you'd be kind of stupid to have it like in a bank account. They're losing 15% of value every year. So people are just trying to buy buy anything that will retain value in real estate. So they're frantically trying to put their money in real estate. Now it's pretty clearly that trying to put your cash in LA. I mean, LA has, for as much as their houses cost, the actual mortgage payment is going to be way higher than the rents, because the rents haven't really caught up, or rents are lagging behind. So people don't want to take a loss, because the more you hold that property, the more you lose. So I could see this flight to Midwest cities where you don't start losing money from the day one you buy the building, or you might even make some positive cash flow tiny bit of cash flow that can pay for the repair expenses that inevitably do come up. Okay, it's easier to change where we live than it's to change how we live. It's called voting with your feet. Whether it's Boise, Reno, Portland, Austin, American housing market has caught in a vicious cycle of broken expectations that operates like food chain. The Shakers flee New York and Los Angeles to gobble up the housing in Austin and Portland. Those who priced that. I mean, why is this author not even curious? Why didn't you do this before? I mean, investors in New York and LA, they always had money. How are they able to gobble up every single property in these secondary tertiary markets? It seems something's not right. It just seems that it's probably this author would never even mention the Federal Reserve or low interest rates, or just because I guess that's just a no-no. It's all of a sudden there's a bunch of rich people in LA, New York that can buy up all these other cities. Buyers slim to the cheaper feeding grounds of places like Spokane. The cycle brings bitterness. Don't move here bumper stickers. And Spokane has supercharged during the pandemic in companies shift to remote work. No matter how many times that happens, no matter how many cities and states try to blunt it with recommendations to build more housing and provide subsidies for those who can't afford new stuff, no matter how many zoning battles are fought or homeless camps lamented, no next city as of yet seems better prepared than the last one was. Just a few years ago, Spokane household that made the median income could afford about 2/3 of the homes on the market, according to Zillow. Now prices are up 60% over the past 2 years, pricing out broad swaths of the populace and fomenting an escalating housing market crisis marked by resentment, zoning fights, and tenants. And also too, like if house prices are going up so fast, well, these investors that bought, they can refinance their property and pull their equity out, and they can buy more. So it's like a self-perpetuating cycle in a way. And then them being able to refinance their house, pull their money out, well, now they have more, more money to buy other things and cause the prices to go even higher. Being an it place was something Spokane leaders had long hoped for. The city and metropolitan region have spent decades trying to convince out-of-town professionals and businesses that it would be a great place to move. Now their wishes have been granted and the city has been grappling with the consequences. All right. Growth is never perfect, and Spokane influx has been accompanied by a booming employment market. It has increased wages. There we go. Turned abandoned warehouses into offices and helped the city recover jobs lost during the pandemic. See, there is a silver lining. This is normally called progress, but for the people who already live here and around Spokane or the suburbs just across the border in North Idaho, this shift from living in a place that was broadly affordable to broadly not has come with a suddenness of a car crash. Now many workers are wondering, At what point the growth is only makes it harder to keep a roof over their head. Okay, so the consequences. So I guess there's another story here. Standing by a snow-covered lawn over an overcast afternoon, Steve Slibar, a local real estate agent who's been selling homes for 5 years, explains Spokane's transformation in terms of 6-inch screen. When he thinks of a traditional buyer, Ms. Slibar said he imagined a couple thousand miles away, perhaps a beach, looking at their phones. They consider moving to a cheaper city and do a search homes. Clients like this, Ms. Weeby invest. Clients like this. Why would Ms. Slibar invest $3K in a camera that does 3D scans of houses? Okay. Here we go. Here's some numbers. All this happened recently in the years after the Great Recession, when home builders were in bankruptcy or hibernation. Migration to the Spokane region plunged. That pattern shifted in 2014 when, as a switch had been flipped, wages of migrants started arriving as early as high-cost cities like Seattle and San Francisco saw their housing market go into a tech-fueled frenzy. By the end of 2014, migration to the Spokane region jumped to more than 2,000 net new residents compared to net loss year before, according to Equifax and Moody's Analytics. Annual growth has only continued, rising further with the pandemic to more than 4,500 net new residents. Sometimes they come for a chance to buy their first new home. Other times a bigger house or some land. Joel Sweeney, an academic advisor at Eastern Washington University, wanted the best of both. Single family house on a quiet street that was close enough to downtown that he could walk to a good brewery. That's sort of Goldilocks urbanity. That's funny. I need to make I should start a real estate company. That Goldilocks urbanity could cost $1 million in Austin. This is what I've been saying. This is what I've been telling so many people. This is the first time I read that somebody. So in LA, yes, it's possible to rent something, but you'll be living in a shitty neighborhood, surrounded by strip malls and just other shitty houses, rundown houses, and you would have to take an Uber anywhere. And if you want to go to like everything you can walk to is awful. Like a Caesar Pizza or like a Burger King. That's it. And you have to take an Uber if you want to go to a brewery, you know. And that's the charm, the awesome charm of some of these secondary, tertiary cities where you can actually afford a house, where on the street or in a neighborhood where things are still walkable. Like walk to a bar, walk to a grocery store, stuff like that. I mean, it's huge. Like that same type of walkability would cost millions of dollars in LA. Okay, you could not get a house for $300K in Austin, where you could walk to a bunch of different stuff. Nurses and teachers. Here we go. So basically, one house has been sold a couple times from 168K to 300K. When Miss Slibar got into the business, she said that her clients were nurses and teachers, and now they're corporate managers, engineers, and other professionals. What you can afford in Spokane has completely changed. Typical home in Spokane area is worth $400K, according to Zillow. That's vastly less expensive than markets like San Francisco or LA, Seattle, Portland, but it's dizzying and enraging to long-term residents. So is it that Los Angeles being governed so badly, it exported its awful flaws? Meaning LA was so expensive because of its shitty zoning, or only such a restrictive zoning that where like one house per lot, that the buildup of people that wanted to live next to these jobs were so great that when it exploded, it just shot like all these people all around the United States that just bid up housing prices everywhere else. I mean, technically, all these people, if they loved LA, they could have stayed in Los Angeles if they had a different zoning policy, which would allow big apartments or high rises or whatever to be built. Or I guess if you still want to preserve the quote unquote character of the neighborhood, you could have it that it looks like just like two big houses on a lot, but it's technically be 4 units. But again, that's politically impossible. So did this this problem spread to everywhere else in America? 5 years ago, a little over half the homes in Spokane area sold less than 200K. About 70% of its employed population could afford to buy a home. Now, fewer than 5% of the homes, a few dozen a month, sell for less than 200K, and it's less than 15% of the area's employed population can afford a home. A recent survey by Redfin, the real estate brokerage, showed that home buyers moved to Spokane in 2021 had a budget 23% higher than what locals had. So some ladies, a client's nurse, Lindsay Similar, a 38-year-old nurse who grew up in Spokane, wants to buy a home in the 300K range, but keeps losing out because she doesn't have enough cash to compete. Spokane isn't so competitive that it's awash in all cash offers as some higher priced markets are, but the prices have shot up so fast that many homes are appraising for less than their sale price. Yep, that's a hugely annoying problem. Forcing buyers to put up higher down payments to cover the difference. Yeah, that's awfully annoying. A dozen failed offers later, Ms. Lebar has decided to sit out the market for a while because the constant losing is so demoralizing. If prices don't calm down, she said, she's thinking about becoming a travel nurse with a healthcare workforce so depleted by COVID-19. Travel nursing pays much better and hopefully will allow her to save more for down payment. Quote, positive activity, okay. Spokane job market is among one of the strongest in this nation, and the virtuous economic cycle of people coming for housing, causing businesses to come for people, causing more people to come for jobs, is in full swing. And yet in Seattle and California, before increasingly across the nation, the surge of rising prices, particularly for rent and housing, makes it feel less virtuous than advertised. The recent Realtors report warned of significant social implications if the city doesn't tackle housing. The issue included young families not being able to buy or taking on excessive debt, small businesses not being able to hire, difficulty keeping young college graduates in town. All right, let's get into, I guess, the homeless issue. Let's see, we're here. All of this has compounded at the lowest end of the market, where the nonprofit Volunteers for America Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho affiliate, which runs 3 shelters and maintains 240 apartments for people who were formerly homeless, said it will lose a quarter of its units next fiscal year, and as most of its funding goes to higher rents. In December, temperature dropped and shelters filled. Advocates and members of the homeless population protested by setting up several dozen tents on City Hall steps. The encampment was gone in 2 weeks, but later has been reconstructed into a patch of dirt on the other side of town. The winter cold, it smells like ash, and it's soot from the open fires burning to keep people warm. Okay, and I think the author wanted to make one last point here. Ms. Woodward pointed to Kendall Yards, one of the developments outside City Hall window, as an example which she wanted to see more of. Mixed density project could be a postcard picture of what economists and planners say need to combat the nation's housing shortage and the sprawl. In defiance to the single-family zoning laws that dictate the look of most U.S. neighborhoods, Kendall Yards has houses next to townhomes, next to apartments, with retail and office mixed in. People out of town seem to love it, but they're leery of there being more places like it, especially in their neighborhood. Quote, I think it's awesome. I have friends there, and we'll go down there to the farmer's market and walk around. John Schramm, a co-chair of the neighborhood council for Spokane Comstock neighborhood. That's just not my vision of what I want for me. My concern is that I move into a neighborhood because of the way that it was designed when I got here. And when somebody else comes and wants to change that, I'm going to be concerned. He added, I have nothing against duplexes and triplexes, just not next to my house. Well, at least I appreciate the progressives. I mean, they're pretty horrible on a lot of economic issues, but finally, even them are coming around to saying, well, these high prices are because of this single-family zoning issue. And now even New York Times, the Vox or whatever, they are advocating quite rightfully that, if you want to solve the housing problem, you got to just build more houses. You can't stop with just government laws and rent control because that's just going to backfire spectacularly. Yet there is no, like I said before, is no mention about how all, well, one, just even the housing prices, why, like windows and doors and stuff like that, and lumber and all of that's in short supply. Even the ingredients, the materials used to build a house are skyrocketing. So if they could tackle that problem, if they could even just for a second look at the Federal Reserve and then maybe possibly see that a lot of the issues that we have here in America is because of all this ultra easy money that was created